Hello everyone, welcome to my Season 15 mid lane tier list. In this video, I'm going to start from the very beginning since it's a new season. I'm going to go through, add all the mid champions to the list one by one, give you guys my thoughts on them and how they are in the meta. That will all be timestamped in the description below, so feel free to check that out. So before we go into the champions themselves, I just want to really quickly comment on the meta. So I think the meta in Season 15 is actually not that different from Season 14. Despite there being a lot of changes, they were changes that kind of just made the game a more extreme version of what it was before. So in Season 14, snowballing and early game and skirmishing and stuff was already valuable, right? In Season 15, it's even more so. Now, last split, I would have said, if someone asked me what is the most important thing to have as a mid laner, I would have said the ability to win lane and scale. That's what I would have said. And so a lot of people have asked me, coming into Season 15, are scaling champs just non-viable? And the answer was they kind of already were. Champs that only scaled and didn't win lane, there just wasn't really much point to play them over champs that did both, right? Same thing for champs that only won lane and didn't scale. Like, why would you play those when you could play something like a Victor or an Aurora that could just do both? So coming into Season 15, I still think that is the case. The game is very early game focused. The first 20 minutes matter a lot. Snowballing is even more extreme, and I think that while like I said, it's a more extreme version of Season 14, I do think the weightings are perhaps a little different. You can kind of imagine the game has almost been like shifted 5 minutes earlier is kind of how I would say it. So I think that late game scaling is definitely a little bit less valuable than before. Early game skirmishing is a little bit more valuable than before, but for the most part, you're going to see similar champs towards the higher end, but they're kind of going to be rearranged around a little bit. But anyway, I'll go through them all and give you guys my thoughts. So we'll start off with Ahri. So Ahri's going to be in the A tier. Ahri is just an evergreen solo queue pick. She's basically always good. She is not quite at the top tier right now, which is because there are champs that kind of do her job a little better, but they are contested pretty high. She's just a good champ to pick when, well, pretty much whenever, honestly, but also into games where you think you're going to be under a lot of threat. She does do pretty well in the early skirmishes and stuff. She has really good gang setup, obviously wants to fight a lot. The biggest weakness of Ahri is that her 1v1 laning is not great. There are some champs in the meta that can destroy her 1v1 if she doesn't receive jungle assistance. So while you can pick her all the time, it's definitely not as safe a blind pick as it was before. Still worth blind picking, but just not quite as valuable as for when she was S tier. But overall, if you're an Ahri one trick right now, or if you want Ahri in your pool, I definitely think it's pretty good. She's probably going to be around the middle of A tier. Next, Akali will be going into A tier as well. So I think Akali is really, really good. She's also extremely strong in these sorts of skirmishes. The biggest weakness, I guess, of Akali is that she is a little meta gapped just in terms of the champs that are going to be up in S tier, I think are like reasonably good against Akali. So she's definitely more of a counterpick champion, but if you're getting good Akali games, or rather if you're just not getting bad Akali games, I think she's really good. So for me, it wouldn't be a blind pick, but definitely something you should be thinking about. If you have her in her pool, it's going to be, really, really valuable. Akshan, I believe, is also A tier, although I'm not really sure where within A tier. I feel like he's kind of on the lower end. So Akshan is really, really good because, he's got the strong laning phase. He scales pretty well. He's definitely able to fight and do a lot of stuff early. I think the, again, only issue of Akshan is that some of these meta matchups are kind of difficult for him. You're strong enough early and you still have the ability to fight that it can be okay. But there are just like these certain champs running around that you really would like to avoid. Stuff like, Victor and I think Aurora as well. In that regard, it's like you could be okay because they're going to be banned a lot of the time, right? Like those champs are pretty OP. And I think he's one of the better AD mids. So he definitely should be in A tier, but I think he's probably towards the lower end. Now for Ambessa. So I think Ambessa is either the very top of B tier or the very bottom of A tier. So the thing with Ambessa is that she is a really greedy counterpick champion. Ambessa into melees is super, super solid, and it's a flex pick, which is pretty nice. But Ambessa blind pick is really, really bad, and you're going to get punished very hard by range champs. So Ambessa does have value at the moment because you can play her into Yone, you can play her into Galio, or if other people are just like blinding melees that they shouldn't. That being said, like because she's pretty much not blindable at all, I'm not sure if she makes it quite into A tier. I'm not sure. I think this is one that I'll put at the very top of B for now, but I think we will have to revisit. As a counterpick, I think Ambessa is insanely, insanely broken. Now, on to Anivia. I think Anivia is probably pretty low in C tier. I don't think it quite makes it to D, but I think there's a lot of problems with Anivia. So the first one is that Anivia does lose basically any mage matchup. Like, you're not going to be able to get Prior, you're not going to be able to get into River. And in order to neutralize these matchups, you need to build really defensively. You know, you have to go stuff like Rod of Ages, and the problem with that is that Rod of Ages is such a bad item, pretty much. You know, like, if you really want to do damage on Anivia, you need to be going something like, you know, maybe Malignance into Liandry, or, you know, something like Seraphine into Liandry, something that has, like, Liandry, or even a flat pin build with a Shadow Flame or something. If you go Roa Seraphs, it's like, you are very tanky, but you just do so little damage, and it's like, you know, why are you playing for scaling on Anivia when we could be playing for scaling on something like Victor instead, right? So I think overall Anivia is pretty weak. I can't really think of a good time to pick Anivia. Maybe into something like Nunu. Like, there are some specific matchups, but even as a counterpick to melee champions, there are much better options in Anivia. That being said, you know, Anivia is one of those champs that, like, really catches people off guard, and, you know, if they're not familiar with it, you can often pick up kills. I do think, especially as you get into higher lows, though, it falls off pretty hard. So probably exclusively a counterpick champ, and in my opinion, not a very strong one at that. Annie, I think, should be B tier. You could maybe even see Annie sneak into A tier. I think Annie's sort of an underrated champ in general. Surprisingly strong in the laning phase if you play with Ahri and E-Star, and you kind of use that movement speed and that auto range in order to punish your opponent. Of course, she's very, very good in the skirmishes as well. So I kind of like Annie as a champ. I think the main reason not to play Annie is that it kind of just feels like she does a little bit less than some of the other champs that are similar to her, such as Aurora. So it's like, I don't know, if those champs are gone, maybe you could look for Annie, but there's not really much point in investing in Annie when there's kind of better versions of her that exist, even though she's not a bad champ herself. Asol, I feel like, should be in B tier somewhere. So the thing with Asol is that he actually has a reasonably decent lane, and he is a reasonably decent skirmisher, but I wouldn't say he's, like, particularly strong at anything. And, you know, he does have that scaling win condition, but it's like, again, there are champs that are stronger early and better skirmishers that scale better, such as Victor. So it's kind of like, I don't know, there might be some games where you get a really good matchup on ASOL, and that's going to mean that you can, like, accelerate your scaling, accelerate your, you know, I guess you're getting prior, you can accelerate the map, and that can give you time to scale, and you can kind of secure the late game win condition for your team. I think that could be fine. But overall, I don't really see ASOL picked very much at the moment. There are a lot of bad matchups for him in the meta, so you probably want to exclusively counterpick him into, yeah, I don't know, just the good matchups for him, basically. Now, Aurora. Aurora is insanely broken. I think Aurora is, without a doubt, S tier. I've played so much Aurora so far, I'm thinking like 8-1 or 7-1 or something. I think Aurora is crazy broken for a lot of reasons. So first off, she's a flex pick, which often can get you a better matchup in champ select. On top of that, she has tools for dealing with all the bad matchups. So Aurora in 1v1 is really, really good against any melee champ, pretty much. She is countered by range mages, but the thing is, against range mages, you have some of the best gank setup in the game. It's very, very difficult to survive as something like a Syndra or a Victor or an Ori into something like Aurora plus Jarvan plus, like, Nautilus or Rel, Leona or whatever. So it's very, very difficult champ to counter. On top of that, you know, even if you do manage to get some sort of lead against Aurora in lane, she scales insanely well. She has incredible team fighting. She's great on side lane. You know, a lot of variety in builds too. You can play Comet Emax in your difficult matchups, Electrocute Qmax in the easier ones. You know, you have a Liandry CDR build in order to deal with tanks. You've got burst builds. I think she's just insanely, insanely overloaded. And I'm kind of at the point where at the moment I'm just picking Aurora whenever it's open. Even into the bad matchups and stuff, I just pick it to secure it. I think it's incredibly, incredibly broken. I will also be posting an Aurora guide pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. Azir. Azir, I feel like probably somewhere in B as well. Maybe a low A. So they're still playing Azir a little bit in Korea, but the thing is, like, I don't really see how you can justify it. I guess it's like, you know, the thing with Azir is he does have a pretty good 1v1, but again, it's not as good as anyone else's, really. You know, it's like solid, but not to the point where you're picking Azir to win lane, right? And also his team fighting is good, but it's kind of conditional. You need to be able to have some sort of flank or to know that they don't have flashes so you can get a big ult or something. And there are a lot of champions that just don't really need those requirements and don't need any specific items. Like, you know, you kind of want a recurve bow or a tier 2 boots or something that allows you to fight on Azir, even a Nashor's completed. So overall, I think the game being shifted like that 5 minutes earlier, kind of like I was saying before, makes it so Azir is not top tier, but I have still been seeing people have pretty good results on Azir. So I think he is probably like on the higher end of B tier, but I don't think he's particularly worth prioritizing at the moment. Maybe as a counter pick into champs that have gank set up that you still need to win lane against. Like I think Azir is pretty good against Aurora. I think Azir is also pretty good against Ahri. So there are some matchups you could pick it into, but you definitely need to know how to play Azir and then use it as a counter pick, which is a lot of investment. Now moving on, I'll quickly put Bran on the list. I'm not going to talk much about Bran because it doesn't really get played in high elo, but I think Bran, especially in lower elos, is actually pretty good. When I make my low elo tier list, it'll probably be near the top. But I think in higher elos, the problem with Bran is that he just loses lane to the other strong laning mages. He actually does have a pretty good laning phase, but it's not quite as good as the other bullies. And then his item build's a little weird. Yeah, I don't know. The item build's a little strange because if you want to go mana, you have to, build into Blackfire. Blackfire first item is not bad, but then you're lacking like the Ryze slow, which gives you the, the slow obviously, and the tankiness in order to survive the bad matchups. So I don't know. I think Bran's like underrated as a champ, right? Like he could like maybe be at the bottom of B, but I also just don't really see any reason to prioritize Bran. Like if we want to play some big AoE damage dealer with a strong lane, you should always play Victor. So in that sense, I don't think he has much value. I don't know. Maybe high C, low B. Moving on to Cassio, I guess. So Cassio is, I would say, not very good. I think Cassio is one of the champs that benefits the least from the boot changes. Like she doesn't really have any boot upgrade to go for, which is kind of a shame. She just gets like a little bit of MS on her passive instead, which is really annoying because, you'd really like to be able to buy Swifties and, get even more movement speed. I also think Cassio in general is just not very good mid at the moment. Like the meta matchups are really, really tough. So I think if you're playing Cassio, it's exclusively as a counter pick, and even then, I feel like the counter picks aren't really that favorable. If you want to be a Cassio one trick at the moment, you should be playing top lane most likely, or maybe even bot lane. I think mid is her weakest role. So I'll probably put Cassio, yeah, somewhere in the low B. It definitely can still carry games, but I think you're making life pretty hard for yourself by playing Cassio compared to one of the stronger champs at the moment. Now, Corki is a champ that I am kind of surprised by. So if you look on Korea at the moment, basically every mid has a really good win rate with Corki. And I think the reason is that AD mids inherently aren't super blindable. The only really good blindable AD mid at the moment is Yone. So the other one we're kind of left with is Corki. And I think that AD mids in general have lost a little bit of value, and the big reason for that is that AP junglers are not that good at the moment. The best junglers I'd say are probably Wukong, Viego, and then maybe Skarner, so all these like big AD champs, as opposed to, like you want to play these with something like a Lilia or a Zyra, and I think those champs are not as valuable in the way the game works, right? Like First Blood is such an important objective with the Fizz, and, jungler is one of the most important roles for securing that. So I'll probably put Corki at a very low A. Like I said, I'm surprised that people are finding so much success with him, and it might just be that it's still early in the season. I personally have not played any Corki myself this season, so we'll have to wait and see. But I think just because he has value as a blindable AD mid, I think that might make him good. And he actually is pretty decent into Aurora as well, so that gives you something there. Plus, you can play him into Galio. Yeah, I guess he does have some good matchups. So he's blindable, has good matchups into other meta mids, and is like reasonably strong at skirmishing early, even if he doesn't really offer any form of gank setup. Dynamid, a little underrated, I think, but also like not insanely strong. I think she's just very middle of the pack, like maybe somewhere in here. I think the Q spam from Dyna can be really, really annoying, especially if you're into a matchup that's immobile and can be ganked as well. So like once they get low, you can set up the gank. And of course, against champs that don't have sustain, it's pretty powerful. Dyna is also very, very good at skirmishing early. Like the level 6 spike around a Grubs or something is very, very good for Diana. The main reason I think you don't see Diana played mid more is, one, it's easier to play jungle, and two, there are better versions of Diana, such as Akali or Sylas. So it's not that the champ is insanely weak, really, but there's just no real reason to pick her over the other stronger options. But yeah, she should be somewhere in the middle of B tier. I think she's a little underrated. Ekko is kind of in the same boat. I'd say, like, he is, as a counter pick, can be solid into certain things. He is pretty good at skirmishing at one item, I would say. I don't think he's an insane skirmisher super early in the game unless you can get a really big W. So yeah, probably somewhere around here. I feel like it's better to play something like Sylas than Ekko. It's kind of like similar playstyle of being the, I don't know, assassin slash bruiser that wants to engage. And yeah, I guess like kind of the same as Diana, right? I think just better champs at what is valuable at the moment. I do think that Ekko's side laning is probably better than most of the other assassins. Like, you're a lot safer, but there's actually less time to side lane than before, just because there's so much going on the map at all times, especially with you know, the Atacon being up as well, and just people being more aggressive in general because there's so much to fight over. So I don't know, for me, yeah, somewhere in the middle of B tier. Fizz is probably a low B, so I think with Fizz, he should be good in the meta right now in terms of, you know, fighting and setting up first blood and stuff is amazing for Fizz, and I think it's possible that in lower elos, Fizz is really dominant right now, but at least in higher elos, the meta matchups, especially when you guys see the S tier, are pretty rough for Fizz. You know, you've got champs like Aurora, you know, other strong picks like Galio or like Resolve Victor. These champs are really, really hard to beat 1v1. So if you do get a good matchup for Fizz, you can definitely take over. But I feel like the only champ that's like super good for Fizz that's like meta at the moment is maybe like Ahri and Syndra. So there's not going to be that many matchups where you have this really good counter. And I think that most Fizz players tend to be one tricks because it is the champ that kind of needs a bit of investment into like the limits and the mechanics and stuff. So I think overall B tier, but if he's part of your pool and you're using him as a counter pick, I could see him go a little bit higher. Next one on the list is Galio, and I'm pretty sure Galio is S tier or at the very top of A, but I'm pretty sure it's S. So Galio is insane at the moment. He can, one of the few champs that can tank some of the more difficult champs in lane, like Aurora and Victor. He's also an insane skirmisher, perhaps even the best. You know, he's certainly one of the best in the meta at the moment. There are some weaknesses to Galio, but they're really not that worth thinking about. So in Korea, if someone blinds Galio, you do see Smolder come out into it a lot. But the thing is, you know, like if you have something like Galio Wukong and the enemy team has Smolder Zyra, the game is like all yours for the first 20 minutes, right? Like you're just gonna have so much control, and even though they'll be strong into you, you're gonna be so ahead by the time that they really hit their stride. I think there are some more dangerous matchups that can come out, like maybe a Tristana or an Ambessa that could affect the game a bit earlier. But overall, I think just like with how OP it is, it's definitely something you guys should be thinking about. It's a great blind, works well with basically everything in the jungle right now. And the variety of builds as well means there's a lot of different stuff you can do with neutralizing bad matchups and snowballing the ones that are actually good for you and stuff like that. Next, we have Hwei. Hwei is probably somewhere in the A tier as well. So Hwei is a really, really good pick into melee-heavy compositions. It's kind of like Taliyah or Cassio, where the more melees they have, the more value you get out of Blackfire Liandry and just applying your burns over and over and over. So I think Hwei mid is not bad. I think Hwei is actually just better bot, though. I think APC is currently the best position for Hwei. It means you don't have to deal with some of those harder mage matchup mids like Syndra or Victor or something like that. If you are using Hwei mid, it is blindable because you know you can neutralize pretty easily, but I do think you want to see a few melees on the enemy composition before you lock this in, or at least short range champs, you know, stuff like Draven. Hwei is quite good against, even though that's a range champ, of course. So yeah, I think Hwei's pretty solid, should definitely be somewhere in the A tier. We might need to rearrange this at some point. I'll probably come back to this at the end and move some things around, but for now, he's definitely an A tier champ. Irelia, I want to put kind of at the top of B tier as well. Could maybe sneak her way into S tier, but there's a few things that make Irelia a little worse, so first off, I think the jungle meta is really bad for Irelia. You know, playing Irelia into something like Wukong or Skarner is absolutely miserable. Also, with as much CC as people are picking in mid, it can be pretty hard. There definitely are matchups you can snowball, you know, something like a Victor or something like a Syndra, but, you know, a lot of the time you have the Victors going for the grass build, which is a lot harder to punish, and you don't see Syndra blinded that often, so if you're a good Irelia, you get a good matchup, you can definitely take over. But I don't think the champ is like good enough to really be prioritized all the time. But I don't know, there is some flex value there as well, so there's something to it. I think it's an underrated champ in general, but probably not really worth the investment. Jayce, I think, will go somewhere in B tier as well. So Jayce he's got good and bad things. So first off is that the better Jayce build overall, I think, is to play Eclipse. But the problem with that is if early game is as important as we all think it is, then the Dirk build is much better, especially for those like first few fights that happen before the first item is completed. So I think you definitely can play Jayce, and you definitely can, you know, go Dirk Jayce and really try and impact the early game. But like the matchups are not that great, right? Like you can play Jayce into Galio, I think that's good. Definitely don't want to play Jayce into Aurora or Victor or anything like that. A lot of the mages up here are pretty hard too, Hwei, Syndra. So it's like pretty hard to get a really good matchup as Jayce, and I think it's definitely one of your greedier picks. And if you are, you know, like counterpicking with an AD, there's much better greedier picks you can go for example, Tristana or Corki, or potentially even a Smolder if you're getting an ultra free matchup. Moving on, what do we have next? We'll put Kassadin. So I think Kassadin is not good. Now, I could be slightly wrong on this. So I know some people have said that the new ulti rune is really good on Kassadin. That being said, I just can't see Kassadin being good at the moment. Like, the game is just too fast-paced, and I think he just loses prior, and even loses the 1v1 in a lot of matchups, right? Like, even the matchups that are meant to be good for Kassadin, like, I always see people saying you should pick Kassadin into things like Ori or Syndra, and I mean, personally, I've never lost to a Kassadin, even when I was in EU. That was, like, the home of Kassadins. I played against Kassadin all the time. I just never lost to them in lane. It was super, super easy to bully them the whole game long. And I just don't really think there's a payoff. Like, he does scale well, but it's not even that great, right? Like, would you say Victor outscales, or Kassadin outscales a champ like Victor? Like, maybe in the 1v1, but in terms of teamfight DPS, if they're on even items, maybe. But, you know, the Victor should have so much more gold. So I don't know. He's probably like, he could maybe sneak his way into B tier. Like, I feel like it is a champ that has like, yeah, we'll put it here. I feel like it has like more carry potential than stuff like this, but I think it should be at the very bottom of B, and you've got to be really careful with how you're picking him. I don't know. Maybe he should be C tier. I'll leave him here for now, but potentially we'll move him around a little bit. Katarina will put somewhere in the B tier as well. I think she may be at the higher end of B tier. Not quite sure where she should go. I think that Kat, even though like her matchups are never really good, she's just one of the best champs at getting randomly fed. And in this sort of fast-paced meta where everyone's fighting all the time, I think Katarina can definitely benefit from that. So yeah, I think she's good. I think that the difficulty of Kat is that she is so difficult as a champ that you basically have to one-trick or two-trick her. But ideally, you know, perfect world, Katarina would just be like part of your pool, and it would be your counterpick to something else. But just the time and investment required to be that good at Katarina basically rules that out, and you're just forced to be a Katarina one trick. But I do think if some pro player were willing to invest like 1,000 games into Katarina, it could actually be valuable. But it's just so much work for a champ that really just can't be picked that often. So yeah, we'll put Kat somewhere in here. I think she's pretty decent, just like fighting and stuff. Now, next we have LeBlanc. So LeBlanc should be, I think, a low A. So LeBlanc is pretty good. Like, she's got this very strong laning phase. She is very good at skirmishing early. There are some negatives to LeBlanc, one of which is that she's very bad at killing tanks, and there are a lot of tanks in top lane at the moment. And so, you know, you have to make sure you're killing everyone else, which normally is fine because LeBlanc has very good access to the carries. Now, the problem comes in where tanks actually do more damage than carries a lot of the time. Yeah, I'm not even joking. I'm sure you guys have seen this. Like, a lot of the top lane tanks do genuinely just out DPS everything else in the game. So they become like the highest value target, right? But you just can't deal with them as LeBlanc. And so it's like if you kill the enemy 80 carry, but then the enemy Cho'Gath or Cassante or whatever just like rips through your team regardless, it's like doesn't feel as valuable. So I still think it's good, and it's definitely a good counter to a lot of matchups. Like, it's really good into Yone, which is a highly prioritized AD mid. So there's lots of times you want to pick it. It's really good with the AD junglers at the moment as well. But I do think it's lost a lot of value, mainly because of the tank meta, which is kind of annoying. Next one, we have Lissandra. I think Lissandra also should make it into A, or maybe high B. So the thing is, Lissandra, similar to Galio, is an incredible team fighter. Really, really insane in any sort of skirmish. Lots of gang setup. Amazing with the meta junglers at the moment. But matchup-wise, the 1v1s are pretty rough. And also, she's nowhere near as good at neutralizing as Galio. She can definitely be roughed up pretty hard in the 1v1, so you're really reliant on receiving help from your jungle and support. If you're in a high-elo game, this shouldn't be too much of a trouble, and there's maybe an argument that if you're in a lower elo game, your opponent won't pressure you enough in lane for you to really need help. So, I don't know, maybe you can get away with Lissandra, and I do think if you get a free Lissandra pick, it's one of the greedier options. But just be a little careful blind picking it. I think you can end up in a situation where, you know, let's say your jungler picks something off meta, like you end up with something like Lissandra Kane and you're playing into Victor. Like, you're not going to receive any ganks and you're just going to get demolished 1v1, which is going to feel really miserable all game long. Lux should be a pretty high B somewhere. I think we'll put it somewhere in here. I think Lux is a criminally underrated mid laner. I think she's really, really strong. Has the ability to neutralize pretty much any matchup. Also has the ability to win a lot of matchups. I think most Lux players are just honestly very bad at Lux, especially in the laning phase. Like, you can pressure so hard, but because she's so forgiving, most, you know, Lux players have never really learned that, and they just play her ultra passively. I think Lux actually is a pretty good skirmisher as well. She does struggle into hyper mobility though. You know, like Lux wouldn't be a good skirmisher against Katarina, for example. But Lux is a pretty good skirmisher against some of these other champs up here. You know, like it can be played into any of the immobiles, or, you know, if they just don't have champs with a ton of dashes. I think the main reason, there's two main reasons you don't see Lux more. One is that, honestly, I think a lot of people just see Lux as an ego champ, and so they just don't play it. Two, Lux actually is better bot lane. I think APC Lux is her best position, and I swear to God, Lux is actually turbo broken. I kind of wish this champ was played more so it would get nerfed, but I don't think it's ever going to get nerfed. So abuse it while you can. Definitely underrated, and honestly, like, I could see it being higher than B tier, but I don't want to encourage you guys too much. And it does have some weaknesses. Like, it does, even though you can neutralize lots of matchups, there are some, again, champs like Victor that are pretty hard for you to win 1v1, and you're definitely looking to, like, neutralize. But neutralizing is not so good when you get outscaled. So, I don't know. There are problems with Lux, I guess, that keep her from higher tiers. But whenever I play against Lux, I feel like this champ is way too impactful. So it probably should be played a bit more. Malz, I think, is pretty low tier. I actually played some Malzahar recently because I kind of wanted to test him. You know, I thought that maybe in the tank meta, Malz would be really good. But the thing with Malz is that, I mean, his laning phase is pretty weak to begin with. Like, it's very hard to pressure people aggressively. For the most part, you are going to get punished really hard in the lane if your opponent really knows what they're doing. In lower elos, Malz is definitely good. And when I, you know, make a tier list focusing on the lower elos, I'll probably put Malz a bit higher. But it's really difficult to pull Malz off in the higher elos at the moment. And also, there are some really devastating counter picks. For example, Smolder. So you've got to be ultra careful blind picking Malz. Like, he's basically only a counter. And then even when you are countering, it's like you would probably counter with something greedier anyway. So I don't really like Malz. Not a fan overall. Might even... No, I think he deserves C tier. He does do a lot of damage if you manage to get out of lane and you're very short range. But that's quite conditional. So what do we have next? Looks like we have Naafiri. Naafiri, I think, is kind of underrated. I think she's probably in the B tier. I think she's definitely one of the more underrated counterpicks. I think she's kind of like Ekko and Diana, where she's really, really good if you do get the good matchup, but there are some matchups that are pretty rough, or matchups at least where you're not going to be able to snowball. So basically anything that has CC for when you go in, for example, Ahri Charm, LeBlanc Chain, Hwei EQ, you know, when you W4, these can all be guaranteed if they time it right. And that makes it quite difficult for you to get favorable trades as Naafiri. But I do think it's the kind of champ that scales really, really well. So if you're into a champ that doesn't have a way to stop you from doubling on you, or is just like not a particularly strong laner themselves, I think you can go for some sort of scaling page, or you can play Comet, honestly. There's a lot of different stuff you can do. And in the mid game, she is really, really good. Like, I think from that kind of one item completion all throughout to maybe 25 minutes, she's really, really strong. And even late game, she's not bad. Although, you know, sometimes like the 80 carries and stuff eventually take over. But yeah, I think it's not bad. And I could maybe see it being higher. I kind of want to just like put it here for now. But yeah, I could definitely see it going higher. Moving on, we have Ori. So Ori should be somewhere in A tier as well. Definitely on the higher end of A tier, I think. So Ori is really, really, really good with the meta junglers. She's amazing with Wukong, Viego, and Skarner, which is great. She's also got pretty good matchups into the meta mids. She is like okay against Victor, slightly Victor favored. She's really good 1v1 against Aurora, although you're very gankable. I'd say not bad versus Galio as well. You can't really kill him, but you can play ultra scaling and you're pretty good against him in the side lane. So I'm not sure where exactly I'll put Ori. I definitely will rearrange this a little bit, but she should be on the higher end of A tier. And it's also nice that you have multiple different room pages, right? You can play Phase Rush Q max. You can also play Comet W max depending on matchup. So I like it overall. And I think that you do see quite a bit of Ori picked into Aurora in Korea with mixed results, right? Like if the Ori plays really well, avoids all the ganks, the Aurora ends up very behind. If the Orianna makes one mistake though, you get punished really hard. So you do have to be quite careful with that. It's also quite good in the champs like Ahri as well. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of good matchups up there. Moving on, Neeko I should put on here. I think Neeko could probably make it into A tier. I think that Neeko's laning phase is really strong. Neeko's skirmishing is really, really strong. It's just like, is it better than the other champs that are doing it better, right? Like, would we pick Neeko over these? Probably not. Now, these are going to be banned quite a lot, so in that sense, I think you could probably play Neeko. I don't play a whole lot of Neeko myself, and it's also not very popular on my server, but I do often see Korean games with Neekos in them. Not always mid, sometimes jungle, sometimes support. I think it's a champ that is pretty underrated, and it should be better in this season. I want to say the bottom of A. I think the one weakness of Neeko is that her itemization feels pretty bad. Like, Rocket Belt is like pretty important, but Rocket Belt's not good. You can play some sort of like flat pin build, but of course only if you're solo AP. So I'm not sure if there's like a consistent build you can do all around on Neeko that doesn't, you know, require you to have something. For example, be the solo AP to build flat pen, or be really ahead so that buying Rocket Belt doesn't feel so bad. I'm not sure, but I think, yeah, low A probably, maybe high B. We might move it around. Moving on, I'll come back to some of the niche picks later on. Maybe I'll try to keep it just mid laners for now. So Ryze should be better in Season 15, but I'm still not sure he's good. So the reason Ryze should be better is because there are... Ryze early game is really good. Like, he has really good gang setup, and he has a lot of push and moves. So you can make a lot of stuff happen. You can secure objectives. You know, you can lean on bot lane to help them get the turret. You can easily get first blood with your gang setup mid. The problem is, though, even though Ryze is good early game, Ryze is not particularly good at team fighting. You know, like the Atacon team fight at 20 minutes, Ryze is not very good for this. Ryze wants to do a lot of split pushing. So even though I think he's slightly better, I still feel like he's pretty on the weak side. I actually really wish Riot would just revert Ryze to what he was before, the previous iteration of Ryze, because I think at the time it was kind of considered too OP for the game, and that's why they changed it. But I think Ryze would fit right in. In fact, he might even, you know, not even be S tier. I really wish they changed it back. Old Ryze, the previous Ryze, was some of the most fun I'd ever have in League. So Riot, if you're listening, please, someone pitch to the dev team to revert Ryze, and I'll be very happy. But yeah, let's put him at the bottom of B tier. We have, I guess we'll put Seraphine. So Seraphine mid it's okay. I will put it in B, or maybe like high C. The thing is, as a counter pick into some champs, I think Seraphine's quite good. I think Seraphine's very good with his Malz, and it's also pretty good into Ahri, because like you have a lot of CC, you're a really good team fighter. The big weakness is that your laning phase sucks. You can't really do much aggressively, and a lot of champs can just kind of gain free farm. So I would be pretty careful picking this, but I do think Seraphine mid is underrated, and I don't know, maybe makes it into B tier. I think I'll put it in C just because it's like quite conditional, but I could definitely see, like, you know, Seraphine's not a super difficult champ to pick up. You know, you can be like decent on her pretty early, and you could pick her into, you know, Ahri. You could also pick her with the AD jungles, and it's pretty solid. I'm kind of tempted to put it in B. I think I'm going to do it. I think it's underrated. Might even move her above Ryze. God damn. The glow up. What do we have next? So we'll do Smolder, I think. So you guys might have seen I'm like the biggest Smolder prophet of all time. Absolutely spamming it. Had insane win rates on it last split, and it was feeling really insane. Smolder, I feel like, should be a little bit weaker this split, and the reason is, you know, it's unlikely you hit 225 before 20 minutes unless you're in a good matchup. So I think that it's going to be more important that you counterpick Smolder now as opposed to blind pick Smolder like you could before, and that's going to allow you to make sure that you consistently get those items and get those stacks a little earlier. So for me, I think I'll probably put Smolder somewhere in here. I have a feeling as a counter pick, especially in the Galio, that it's really, really good. And to maybe some of the other champs that can't pressure lane phase that hard, or like can't pressure the lane phase or the map that hard, right? Like basically to where the game around mid is going to be a bit slower. I don't think you want to blind pick Smolder anymore, not because you're scared of losing lane, but just I think the enemy mid can make too much happen before you're really ready to take over the game. You know, like Smolder's big spikes, normally around 11 minutes when you're getting one item, 125 and tier 2 boots, and then kind of around like the, depending on matchup, 18 to 22 minute mark. And like, you know, being 2 minutes late on that Atacon fight could be a pretty big difference, right? Especially if you're in a bad matchup or the game is really snowballing against you and you don't get to spend as much time inside. So I do need to try Smolder more. Haven't played it much. Again, I have been seeing it played a bit in Korea. Like Zeka played a game of it. I've seen a lot of people picking it into Galio, but I think you've got to be a bit more careful with it now. Our next one here, we have Swain. Swain is probably better than last split. I want to say he is somewhere around... Let's put Swain here, maybe. So I think Swain... Okay, Swain's big problem is that he's not particularly good in lane. Also, I think his itemization is not that great, but he is really, really good in the mid game. He's really, really good at all of these early fights. I also think the home guard thing is pretty good for Swain because in bad matchups, you can just base more often and you're not going to lose as much as you did before. But it's like your gank setup's not reliable and you're not really going to secure any first bloods. You're not very good at roaming. I guess you do got these like big objective fights. So overall, I think it's fine. Like, you know, if you want to play Swain, I don't really see any issues with it. But I also don't think it's that strong. I'm never going in a game against a Swain and being like, you know, oh, damn, like, they have a Swain. I think it's one of those champs that it's probably overrated by the community a little bit. Because I think just because Swain is so easy to play makes him stronger in low reloads. Like, I would, if you guys are looking for champs to play, if you're new to the game or you're in low reload, Swain would be near the top. And again, when I make my low reload tier list, he's probably going to be S tier. But I think as you get higher up in the ladder, don't really see much point in playing Swain. Next up, we have Sylas. Sylas is really, really good. Probably somewhere in A tier, probably higher end of A tier as well. A really, really good skirmisher, has gank set up, oftentimes can just get first blood on his own as well. Is amazing at all these early fights, has really good ults in the meta. Probably the only risk of Sylas is that there are some bad matchups if you're blinding him, but if you see good ultis, you can you can go ahead and blind him anyway and it'll be okay. It's just you don't want to end up with a bad matchup and bad ultimates. But you know, overall, if you can get like a good matchup by countering, or if you can get some good ults and that way you win the team fights anyway, I think he can be a solid pick. Not quite sure where I'd put him, but he's pretty high up. I think he's very solid. Next one, it looks like we've got Syndra. Syndra, I think, also S tier, but I'm not sure where. I think I am going to have to rearrange this. I think Syndra is pretty solid. Like, she's a good 1v1 into Syndra. Or into Aurora. She's an okay option into Victor because you have good gank setup, but the 1v1 is not insane. She is definitely more of a counter pick, I think. You know, there are some pretty bad meta matchups for her. Like, I think 1v1s are mostly okay, but again, it's the gank setup. Like, if you play Syndra versus Sylas 1v1, it's okay, but Syndra versus Sylas, Leona, Jarvan, or whatever is going to be really miserable. To try and pick her into, I think, mage matchups more, or into where you see the enemy team as low threat, I think Syndra into low threat compositions is really, really, really good. So it's just, you've got to be a tiny bit careful, like maybe wait and see the support jungle before you lock it in first. If you are against a really aggressive support jungle, maybe just like play Gathering Storm or something instead, play for a bit more scaling, and then just play a bit safer in lane. And, you know, if you come out of lane in a decent spot, maybe you can do something. But that's not really the name of the game right now, right? Like, we want to be getting prime, we want to be entering the river. So if you're scared to do that, then your pick can definitely be, you know, kind of a little lower value. What else do we have? Taliyah. So Taliyah, I think, should probably be an A tier. I think Taliyah is one of the greediest picks in the game, but she really, really pays off. She has incredible scaling, and she's an insane team fighter. And she's an insane team fighter at an early enough time for it to matter, right? She is pretty good at team fighting around like 10 minutes or so, and by 20 minutes, you know, on the Adicon fight, she's really, really strong, especially on 2 items. The thing is, though, it is a greedy pick, right? Like, we have to be quite careful picking Taliyah. There's a lot of threat in the meta. A lot of the matchups are bad for her, but I think, you know, you could play Taliyah as a greedy counter to something like Galio. Maybe not the best because you're enabling the magic resist build. But basically, it's like, if you can get a playable or good Taliyah matchup, I think the champ goes crazy. Especially if Aurora is banned. And the reason I mention that is because I think if you're into melee heavy comp, a lot of the time it's still just better to play Aurora or Victor. But with those being banned, because they are pretty OP and they'll be, you know, they'll be banned a lot, Taliyah can become a pretty good option after that. Where am I? I think I'm somewhere in here. Talon, I think, is pretty mediocre. I think he's probably, like, on the lower end of B, like, maybe something like here. So the thing with Talon mid is that, you know, you can get kills into, like, players that don't really know what Talon does early. And if you do manage to get prior somehow, you can impact the map a lot. But the thing is, it's like, Talon's pretty weak in lane, and can be punished pretty hard unless you get, like, that random level 2 kill from someone disrespecting. And you really do need assistance in order to get going. Plus, as you might remember, like, the AP junglers are not as good at the moment. So, not really a Talon fan, and I think that the AD assassin pool is definitely pretty limited. Yeah, I don't really like Talon. Talon's much better in the jungle. If you do want to be a Talon one trick, I think Talon jungle is actually quite good. I will put Tristana on here. I think Tristana as a counter pick is good, but you actually cannot blind pick her at all. So like maybe in that sense she's C. I don't know. I guess it's kind of like Ryze with Seraphine. It's quite a conditional pick. It's really good against Galio. It's pretty good against Ahri. It's good against when you can play it into Corki, it's fine. It's pretty good against LeBlanc. So there are some good matchups for it. And if your opponent allows you to snowball, I guess, either because of the matchup or just because you're better than them, it goes really hard. But it's not that often you're going to want to be picking it. I think into Galio is the main one. So yeah, if you want to invest some time into learning Trist, it can be useful, especially if you're struggling with some of those matchups. But overall, the thing that made Triss really OP before, which was like basically always win lane, has mobility, has a ton of sustain, that doesn't really exist anymore. Now her sustain is pretty trash. Fwei got nerfed, Absorb Life got gutted. So early game against poke mages, especially things like Syndra, Hwei, or Victor, is really, really difficult. I just realized there's some champs missing. I might have to go back and try and add subs. So Kiana, I'll add on here. I'm not sure when I skipped over her, but we'll put Kiana in. I think Kiana's much in the same boat as Talon and Fizz and stuff. Just not particularly strong in lane, and that makes life really, really difficult. She is an insane skirmisher, which is great. But I think it's just like all these other champs like Naafiri, Kiana, Diana, Ekko, etc. They just like lose the laning phase 1v1 too hard to really be worth it. If you manage to get a good matchup, great. You know, you can play TPD shield and play for like a strong level or one item spike, and that's great. But it's just there are stronger champs available, right? Not that they're weak, but there are stronger versions available. Going further down, looking like all those TF, I think TF is also B tier. So the thing with TF is that similar to those champs I just mentioned, there are much better versions of TF. So TF's thing is like he wants to, you know, set up for ganks mid, move around the map, play side lane, etc. But if you want to do this, like, you know, Galio, Aurora, Ahri, LeBlanc, Lissandra, there's so many options available that are better than TF. I do think TF is like a fine champ, but it's just it doesn't really feel worth it. Like there are definitely some bad matchups and there's not really a great payoff for you managing to survive them. And even like counterpick TF, you know, like if I blind something greedy and someone counters with TF, I'm pretty happy with that most of the time, unless my teammates like really feed into him. So yeah, for me, TF is like pretty low in B tier. But again, it's not because he's like turbo trash, it's just because, you know, why pick him over all the other options we have. Now, moving on Veigar. So I think Veigar is definitely quite weak. I want to say probably in D tier. There might even be some other champs in D tier. I'm not totally sure yet. But the thing with Veigar, do I take him out of D tier? I'll take him out for now. We might move him back. The thing with Veigar is he is the definition of like weak early, but like mediocre scaling. You know, like Veigar's scaling is not even that good because his range is relatively short. And, you know, most champs are going to get prior into him. I think most champs, honestly, are going to outscale him as well. Like, I'm not scared of Veigar at all. Also, I think Veigar's itemization is pretty mediocre. Like, you often have to build, you know, tankier in the early game in order to survive. Now, I do think Veigar in the mid game, kind of like on the third item, or maybe even fourth item, is quite strong. But, like, ultra late game is not good. Early game is not good. So, in my mind, there are just champs that do this so much better. You know, I'd probably stay away from him. I don't even think he's particularly easy, too. So, it's like, you know, I'm not really sure what the point of playing Veigar is. I guess he's fun. He is really fun. I do like Veigar. Vel'Koz. So Vel'Koz also should be low down here. Now, Vel'Koz's one thing is that he is pretty strong in lane into his good matchups. Now, Vel'Koz does have a lot of bad matchups. Like, I think there's a lot of strong laning mages that can really take advantage of Vel'Koz. And because of his immobility, he has to be very, very scared of all the gank setup that we have up here in the A tier. But I don't know, if you can get into a comp with low threat, you can get a relatively easy lane. There is a pretty big payoff. Like, he's a really good team fighter. He does a shit ton of damage. But it's just like the ultra greed pick. And I even think then, you know, if I were being super greedy, I'd probably still go Victor. You know, it's like, why wouldn't we? I guess if Victor was banned, maybe I'd go Talia or something instead. I don't know. If you're insane at Vel'Koz, obviously you can make it work. But for me, the amount of reward you get from it just really does not seem to match the effort you have to put in. Vex, I think, probably a high B. I think Vex is underrated. I don't know, maybe mid B. Yeah, I don't know. We'll put it here for now. I think Vex is underrated. I think it's a champ that if you do get a reasonable lane, you can definitely take over. She's really good at skirmishing. The thing is, though, like her 1v1 is, it's definitely not great. And I'm not sure you really like punish anything that hard. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, if someone blind picks something bad and you pick Vex into it, you might be able to like get a CS lead, but you're never really gonna like blow up the game as a result. I guess you can play Vex into some of the dash champions, you know, things like LeBlanc or Yone or whatever. The thing is, though, all these champs do have really good gank setup, and as an immobile mage, you know, very immobile mage, you have to be very, very careful. So, I don't know. It's not bad, and maybe I am even, like, underrating her too much. Like, I don't know, maybe she's, like, better than Annie and stuff. But to me, I think, again, there are so many better options. Like, if I want to play the Vex playstyle, I'd much rather play Aurora or even, like, Lissandra or something and just, like, really try play for the team fights. Yeah, I don't know, like, Lissandra, to me, if I were picking into LeBlanc or Yone, I'd definitely go for Lissandra over Vex. So it's not bad. Actually, it's, like, really good, especially in low reloads. But I think there are better options like Aurora and Lissandra available. Victor. So I think Victor is either S tier or he's at the very top of A. I think I'm going to put him S. So Victor has some major weaknesses, which are he's immobile and he's not particularly good at skirmishing. And you're probably thinking, okay, in this meta, like, why bother with Victor then when he has, like, these two big weaknesses? Well, he can skirmish a lot earlier than he could before. That's, like, a pretty big thing. Like, he just comes online quicker thanks to his changes. The immobility definitely sucks. You have to be very careful. You know, you've got to play on your windows correctly and, you know, really play around your wards in the jungle and your lack of flash and whatever. But the upsides of Victor are insane. Probably the strongest laning mid in the game right now, you know, with exception of things like Yasuo and Irelia that kind of break the rules. Victor just absolutely destroys basically anything else in the 1v1. You can either play the grass build and beat the assassins. You can play like an Ahri build and you just destroy the mages. You're really reliant playing into Victor as like for someone coming to help you, right? Like if you're playing Syndra or Aurora, you will need help against Victor. And the thing is, it's like even if you get that help against Victor, Victor also outscales just about everything. So like if you do go kind of in that 20 or 30 minute mark against Victor, the game will start to feel pretty rough. But yeah, again, the reason I might put him lower is because there is that period of the game where he's not that impactful, like in the first 5 minutes, at least in the 2v2s and 3v3s, and he is immobile, which, you know, can be difficult. But I truly do believe that the upsides of Victor kind of make up for it. I kind of want to put him at the top of A. I don't know. Okay, I'll put him in S, but like he's like here, you know what I mean? He's like further along in S. I don't think he's quite as good as these champs. I guess it's like a counterpick. You can blind Victor because he's so strong, but if you exclusively counterpick Victor and did avoid all the gank setup, then he's S without question. In fact, he's probably the best champ in the game if you don't get punished. Okay, so let's keep going. Where are we at? We will put Vlad. I think Vlad is very, very mediocre. I think probably C tier. I might get rid of this D tier if we don't end up putting anything in it. I think the thing with Vlad is that he just takes like too long to come online. I think one of Vlad's big issues as well is that, you know, you kind of have to, in order to survive against other mages, you have to take TP. But if you're forced into TP, then you kind of need to take phase rush because otherwise your team fights are just so hard. But then if you take phase rush and you're playing against someone with Ahri or Comet, you're just lacking so much power. So maybe Vlad's a bit better because they nerfed TP a little. And maybe Vlad's a bit better because the home guards are buffed. But overall, I still don't think it's going to be very valuable. It should probably make it into B tier, I think. But I think it's really not good. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't really like Vlad at all. Like, no gank setup. Pretty much like no 1v1 pressure unless you give up all your team fight pressure. If you do want to play Vlad, I think he's much better in top lane than mid, which is definitely the place to look. So we're getting near the end. I'll probably go back and add a few things. Xerath might be a little underrated. Yeah, it might be a little underrated. So I think the thing with Xerath is that he has a pretty good 1v1 into actually quite a few champs. Like, Xerath's pretty good against Hwei. Xerath's pretty good against Aurora. And Xerath's good against, like, some of the greedier mids. Like, if someone blinds, like, a Talia or something, obviously you can punish. The thing is, though, like, is there that much of a payoff? Like, I feel like Xerath is not that great a team fighter. Like, he's good at poking, but champs have so much mobility and so much sustain. A lot of the time, poke doesn't even stick unless you can, like, actually one-shot someone in the way that, like, Lux is a poke champ, right? Very funny. She just one-shots people. But anyway, I think, yeah, probably somewhere in B. I want to put it maybe, like, here or something. Maybe. I don't know. It's not bad. It's got some decent matchups. Definitely counterpick Xerath can be valuable, but I think still, like, if someone blinded something greedy, I think there'd be many more champs I go to towards Xerath, but I don't know. There are definitely, especially if people are troll picking, like if someone blinds Cassio and you drop a Xerath, especially if Victor is banned, you know, that'd be really good. But like I said, there's going to be a lot of champs you go toward before that. Like Ori will be open, Victor might be open, Syndra. So if it's in your pool, great, but you might not end up actually using it that much if you play other champs. Now, Yasuo and Yone. I'll put Yone first. I think Yone is probably the best AD mid. Should be, I think, at the very top of A. Like I said, AD mids are a little weaker because AD jungles are so good. But, like, Yone has so much mixed damage, and he has good gank setup as well. So we'll probably put him pretty high. He's a really good skirmisher. Now, there is some weakness to Yone in that he is not really online until he's completed one item. And then 2 items is really becomes, like, good at team fighting. The thing is, you should be able to get this gold before, like, really big team fights as Yone. So I kind of feel like he's still pretty high tier, but maybe be a tiny bit careful picking him. He's probably the best AD mid blind, or maybe Corki is. But I do think the AD mid blinds are quite a bit weaker than blinding, like, one of these turbo OP champs up here. Yasuo, so Yasuo is not that good. I think Yasuo is in the B tier somewhere, probably just, like, very... like middle of the pack. It's kind of like if you're very good at Yasuo, you can go crazy with him, but he's not that good. You really require, I think, either a super winning matchup to where you can snowball a lot, or to be playing it with something like Diana or Gragas, or, you know, something that's really going to allow you to have more guaranteed engages. I think Yasuo, like Katarina, is one of those champs where if Yasuo were easier, he would actually probably be OP in the sense that, like, Yasuo is a sort of champ that should be a counter pick. It should be something that is just in people's pool. But the problem is Yasuo has such a high skill ceiling that the amount of time invested to become a good Yasuo basically just makes you a Yasuo one-trick. So it's very difficult to maintain it as part of your pool. And that means a lot of the time you will be blind picking Yasuo. And blind pick Yasuo is really bad. Like, if you can't snowball, you're not going to have a whole lot of impact, right? It's very, very difficult to team fight on this champ unless you're up a lot of levels, or, you know, you've got a ton of gold in the side lane, or you have some, like, reliable engage that you can follow up on. So we'll put him here. This might even be too high. Like, I feel like this is where we put him if you're really good at Yasuo. You know, for the average player, like, let's be honest, Yasuo is just straight D tier. But we'll put him, I don't know, let's just put him, like, here somewhere. Maybe could go higher. But it's kind of dependent on what you've got. Zed, I think Zed sneaks into the bottom of A tier. I think that Zed mains always complain about how weak Zed is, and there is some truth to that. You know, like, there are matchups as Zed that you really can't do what you want to do, and also, like, late game as Zed, you kind of just, like, become a poke champion. Like, you're not really, like, a burst champion anymore. But I think there are some things that make Zed really, really good, and one is that he's one of the more blindable AD mids. Like, you can farm from range, and you can definitely follow up if the, you know, if you're playing against a mobile and you've got, like, good gank set up on your team coming from your jungle or your support. He's also really, really good in side lane, and he can get to his item really easily. Like, when I played in Korea, playing against longsword refillable first strike Zed, where they get their eclipse at, like, 8 minutes or whatever, was super, super difficult. I played against Z99 once and on Zed a lot, and I felt that was, like, by far the most difficult version of Zed to play against. So, yeah, I think it's underrated. Again, as a counter pick, though. Like, if you're blinding Zed, I think it's not great. Like, I think Zed into Galio Victor is definitely not that good. I'm not sure about Aurora. I don't think I've ever played it, but you do want to be careful, and maybe it loses value because it's not good versus these champs. But I do think, you know, if these are getting banned or for whatever reason not picked, I think Zed counter pick is, like, not bad into a lot of the champs up here. So I'll put him at the very bottom of A. Maybe the top of B. I'm not sure. We might come back and rearrange that a little bit. And finally, I guess we've got Ziggs, Zilean, and Zoe. So let's do Zilean first. I think Zilean is probably C, maybe could make it into B. So the thing is, like, Zilean is really, really good at skirmishing, but his laning phase is so unbelievably weak. And I think that if you're in an actual elo where people know how to lane and stuff, he shouldn't really get away with it. But I could see in lower elo Zilean being kind of good, and it is pretty good with the meta junglers at the moment, so maybe it could sneak into B tier. But again, it's like, if you do want to play that kind of style where you are just, like, trying to enable your mid jungle, like, why not play Ori, right? Like, I think it's just so much stronger in lane, scales so much better. I guess it doesn't have as good gank setup, but to me feels like it's pretty whatever. Ziggs I think should be better and should be worse. So Ziggs is kind of nice because you do have the potential to take turrets, but taking the mid turret is so hard. People have too much wave clear, and that just makes life really, really difficult for you. So I don't know, at least in mid, I feel like it's going to be pretty worthless against like most of the champs up here. But I don't know, if you can like get Prio and go bot and blow up their turret, maybe it's good. I think you'd probably just rather play Ziggs in bot, you know, play something like Ziggs Karma or Ziggs Lux and really pressure the turret. I think also like Ziggs is not a very good skirmisher, to be honest. Like he does scale well, but in any of these like early grub fights, you're really not going to be useful. So I think we'll put Ziggs somewhere down here in the C tier. And then finally Zoe. I want to put Zoe in A. Yeah, I think I want to put Zoe in A. I think Zoe is really, really good at skirmishing. She's one of the few mids that I think might take Ignite over TP, because there's a lot of people that took Ignite before. The thing is, I still prefer TP on Zoe. I've only played one game ever this split, but I went like 18-2 and 18 or something. It was really, really strong still. And like having a lot of chaos and a lot of fighting in the game is really, really good for Zoe. The main reason Zoe doesn't get played more is a lot of the matchups are difficult. Like 1v1 Zoe versus Victor is really rough, and your gank setup is not reliable, so it's really hard for you to set up ganks in the same way that something like Aurora could. But I don't know, if you get one of these easier matchups, something like an Ahri, or, you know, you can play it into the ADs, like it's quite good into something like Corki, I think you can definitely have a lot of success with her. But it's one of those grittier picks. I think it's definitely not staying A tier if you're like blinding her all the time. I don't know, like you can blind her. I don't know. She is a decent blind, right? Because like it is hard to punish Zoe, but at the same time, it's like if you do get stuck in lane of Zoe and can't really move, then it sucks. I'm not sure. I've used Zoe blind recently, not this patch, but like last season, and it felt pretty good. But there are reasons why you shouldn't blind pick it, and I think it's because you should get punished by jungle support. The mid matchup should be pretty hard as well. So, like I said, I feel like I've been getting away with this, but I don't think you should. I'm not sure. So I think that's basically it. I'm going to rearrange some things. I'm just going to quickly check if there's any, like, actual mid laners I missed. There's definitely, like, a lot of off-meta picks that we could put. Stuff like the Cho'Gath, the Garen, the Gangplank. I'm not going to put all these on here because the video is already very, very long. And I think that, yeah, I don't want to make it way longer by talking about a bunch of champs that very few people play. Yeah, there's champs like Lulu that we could play, but yeah, I'll probably keep it off, at least for this one. Maybe I'll add it in the next patch and talk about it. Especially if it ends up getting played a bit more. There's stuff like Renekton you could play into melees, maybe Rumble into melees. Are there any actual mid laners I'm missing? I don't think so. I think I covered all of them. Okay. Is there anything we need to rearrange? I think S tier is looking good. A tier, Ahri is definitely too high. Let's move some stuff around. So I think we put Ahri like here maybe. And then I think Akali's too high. I think we put like Yone over here maybe. And then let's... Is that about right? Ahri, maybe? Like, hold on. Let's put Sylas there. I think that's looking like a little better. Then Ori, that seems right. I think Sinner should be a tiny bit lower, and so should Hwei. Let's put these... Yeah, no, probably leave it like that. And then let's move Corki up a little bit. Maybe to... Actually, no, because most people are not that good at Corki. I'm just thinking out loud here. I haven't really thought about this too much. We'll put LeBlanc. I think Lissandra should be a little lower. We'll put Talia probably with her. Yeah, I think that's like probably better for A tier. I think it's pretty arguable. You know, you could move things left and right, but I think that's looking like a little bit better to me. Maybe this. Yeah, I like that for our A tier. And then did we want to move anything up from B or move anything down? Could maybe move List down. I think we'll keep it though. Do we want to move Ambessa up as a counter? Honestly, yes. I think Ambessa does belong in this tier. Like, if we're using counterpick Lissandra, we can probably use counterpick Ambessa as well. And then I think B tier, the thing is, like, you could argue a lot of B tier. You could definitely move stuff around. I will also say the A tier is bigger than it is normally for me. And that's just because, like, I think at the start of the split, the meta is not quite as figured out as normal. Like, I think the S tier is very obvious, but I think below that, it's still kind of like... You could definitely move like maybe these 5 champs here and maybe Neeko. You could move all those into B tier and it would be fine, you know. At the same time, like I think they are like better than most of the champs in here, but situationally these champs can be very good, right? And then yeah, we'll leave B tier I think as is. We won't rearrange it. And then finally C tier. Yeah, I mean, could we rearrange this? I think we'll get rid of D and for now, and we'll just change this to that. Then do we want to rearrange this at all? I think I like these at the end. We'll maybe move Kassadin a bit further over. Maybe put Vel'Koz down this end. And yeah, I think something like that. Possibly I'm underrating Kassadin. Maybe he should be in B tier. Yeah, I have a feeling he probably should. But I'm not sure. We'll leave it like this for now. Anyway, I'll probably like reiterate a little bit on this on the next patch. Like I said, I've played quite a bit of games on this patch. I've streamed 10 hours and then 5 hours, so I did play quite a lot. Those VODs are available if you go to the live section on my YouTube, or also if you want to see some of the Twitch highlights, go to my Shock TV channel. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. But anyway, let me know what you guys think of the tier list. Let me know if there's any champions you disagree with or agree with or whatever. Just interested to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys in the next one.